This is Duke University.
Global trade and environmental justice.
Human rights issues are still.
The term Ubuntu.
About the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Is making inferential discovery.
The importance of an archive.
The John Hope Franklin Center.
We're back here on Left to Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, and we're joined by Pastor Carl Kenney of Compassion Ministries. Pastor Kenney, the voice of many.
That's what they say.
How you doing this afternoon, Pastor?
Life is too good to be true. Life is good.
When I first met you, and I didn't first meet you in person, I first met you in a political science book. Bibles, barbershops, and BET.
Okay.
Melissa Harris Lacewell, and her incredible study of the kind of political discourse that occurs outside of Washington circles, right? But in barbershops and in churches every Sunday, and of course, while folks are sitting around watching BET.
Correct.
And she devotes a significant amount of the book talking about your leadership of Orange Grove Missionary Baptist Church. When I first moved to Durham in 2004, as luck would have it, we ended up going to Orange Grove. And this is after you had left.
Correct.
And I just kept hearing these stories about the minister that was there before.
I hope it was good.
Progressive cat.
Okay.
Right, and of course, you know, I hear those things very differently, right? You know, when folks some folks, when they talk about progressive ministers, they're not necessarily saying that in a good sense, right? You know, but when I hear progressive, someone who's challenging the homophobia in the church, challenging gender relations in the church, right? That's the kind of minister that I want to get to know. And it's with that kind of introduction that I eventually was able to formally meet you. So talk to me a little bit about what it's like being a black man of the cloth, given, and on the one hand, there's this history of the black church that's politically progressive, right? But we also know historically that's a very small percentage of black churches, right? Most black churches tend to be very socially conservative. Historically, they had been fiscally conservative. That's not necessarily the case now.
Correct.
Why choose to be an outlier?
Yeah.
You know, if you're Carl Kenney, right? Given the kind of respect and rewards that come with kind of playing your role, staying in your lane.
Right. Well, you know, I don't think it was something that I really chose. I think it's something that chose me.
Yeah.
A big part of my story is an engagement with the people that were struggling with the type of issues that the church was really grappling with. You know, the church is grappling with homophobia, and I had a cousin who died from AIDS, and on his deathbed and cried out. All I ever wanted to do was go back home and sing in the church one last time. And you know, that kind of hurt.
Right.
You know, hearing someone in your own family who's dying from AIDS, who wanted to sing, and this is a guy who sang with Marvin Gaye and in a great voice, and was kicked out of the Pentecostal church in St. Louis because he's gay. You know, and I had to really confront what that meant for me, being a servant of the church that wanted to maintain that culture of separation. I couldn't be authentic in my expression of faith, given the people that I love being there. And the same applied with women. You know, watching women going through incredible marginalization as far as leadership. You know, and making that decision at Orange Grove that I wouldn't go and preach to the church that would not accept women as deacons. Because one thing we would do is accept women in ministry, knowing that the deacons weren't going to allow her to be the pastor. So, in moving for the ordination of female deacons, and because of the women that were close to me in ministry and how they comforted me and supported me in my work, and for me to stand in a place where I embraced that hypocrisy, I couldn't do it anymore. And in time, what happened is I found myself, you know, on the other side of this whole issue. And to be honest with you, it took me by surprise, because in my mind, I was doing the right thing.
Right.
And you know, I never thought that I would be kicked out of a church for doing what I believed to be the right thing.
Yeah.
And even now, you know, that's a very painful thing to embrace, where the institution that you committed yourself to, that you trained to be a part of in a way that spoke to that historical, powerful voice within the Black faith community, you know, the educated clergy, the progressive, you know, radical, revolutionary-minded pastors. You know, I wanted to be that person.
Yeah.
And once you make that decision, you find that everything else around you has changed. You know, we got a TD Fakes now, and you know, the Creflo give me more dollars, and the next thing I know, we're not the norm anymore. So it's been a surprise for me.
And you mentioned an interesting point, right? That we're at this moment of these prosperity preachers, right? These Black televangelists. The kind of folks that Jonathan Walton has written brilliantly about, you know, in his book on Black televangelists. And we hear names like Creflo Dollar. And I give Dollar some credit, right? I mean, his name actually reflects part of his ethos.
Oh yeah, it's his
right?
theology.
I mean, he's honest.
Yes.
and upfront in some ways. But of course, we're also dealing with Bishop Eddie Long,
right?
You know, both before and after the controversy. We're dealing with T.D. Jakes, and the one thing that you've also chosen to do in your work, in your ministry, not only is it the internal critique around the marginalization of Black women and homophobia within the Black church, but you're also still committed to a Black church that speaks back to white supremacy, right? In ways that the most prominent Black ministers, most visible Black, let me say the most visible Black ministers, have really actively chosen not to engage white supremacy in meaningful ways. I understandably, because it's obviously not as lucrative. What continues you on your kind of goal to really push back around issues of race? And economic exploitation and poverty and, you know, the kind of things that Martin Luther King didn't think twice about.
Right. Well, for me, it comes back to my theological uprooting. You know, everything I do in ministry is grounded in a theology that speaks to that.
Yeah.
And I'm a liberation theologian with a process theological bent. You know, and
tradition of James Cone.
You know, I'm James and Cone, and I believe that there's a place for that. That the church has to be that voice that speaks to those systems of contradiction, and those systems of contradiction is misogyny, and it's the racism, it's those institutions that divide and really limit the spirit of people. And I think what, for me, the grounding is the theology. You know, it's having pressed beyond the assumptions of the biblical text. We're living in an age of biblical literalism, and that to me is the difference between what I'm providing and what others are not, is that they're very lazy in the way they exegete the text and leaving them with this prosperity theology where people are coming and running because they just want to know how to get rich. And you know, and I've heard a pastor recently, I was watching a pastor up in Baltimore talk about, I'm the man because I got my Bentley outside, and I'm a man because I got my Ford Taylors, and I'm the man because I got my this, that, and the other. And I look at that and I say, that's not consistent with the theology of Christ, who came as a suffering servant to set forth a way of thinking that really challenges institution that really dehumanizes people. And so for me, it's my theology that roots who I am and the voice I am, and for everything I do, that, you know, I fight against any institution that's going to force me not to be that voice. My column writing, you know, I don't want no sacred cows.
Right, your blog.
My blog, I don't want any sacred cows. I don't want to take on a position that forces me to be silent because of the powers that be say that you got to shut up, boy, because you're making us feel uncomfortable. But to me, that's the theology behind who I am as a prophet in public space. And it's not just the sanctuary that I bear witness to on a Sunday. It's a community that I'm calling to change.
I mean, we just talked with, you know, Alexis Gumbs about this idea of taking the school to the people, right? And in some ways, what you're talking about really is taking the sanctuary to the people.
Right. We talk about it at Compassion, incarnational ministry. That the ministry is incarnate. It's the Word that came flesh and dwelt among us. And so the ministry is where we are. It's not what comes to us on a Sunday. It's where we go. And so, you know, I'm here to be you. You know, the church is here. You know, I walk in, I say the church is the church, say amen at the BU Cafe. Or if I'm
the pastor is in the house.
I'm in the house, or wherever any of us go. You know, we bring that, and the way we witness in those places, in those sacred places, the holy ground where we go. That's really where it speaks to. You know, it's not just the Sunday morning celebration. We get lazy by that. We come to be entertained, but we leave and we're as raggedy as we came in because there's no truth that really speaks to a transformative message for those who feel marginalized and people incarcerated who need to know that that doesn't define my history. My truth. You know, it's not that. My history is not my future. So for us, for me at least, there has to be consistency between my claims theologically and who I am and how that shows up on a Sunday morning. You know, I'm not wearing a robe because that's a symbol of separation. You know, I don't want to be separated from the people. I don't want any symbol that says that I'm better than you. And in fact, I want to be like you the best I can.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're here live at the BU Cafe in Durham, North Carolina. Our guest this evening is Pastor Carl Kenney, the voice of many, Compassion Ministries here in Durham, North Carolina. A few years ago when President Obama was running for election, Jeremiah Wright became the boogeyman.
The boogeyman.
And in some ways it was a sad and even tragic moment because however folks chose to portray Reverend Wright, right? The reality is that this is someone who may have been the most visible connection, you know, to this liberation theology that you talked about, right? In which you can see how active it was on an everyday basis in Chicago. That you understood the reason why Barack Obama was there in the first place. Because it gave him that kind of connection. And I always felt that then candidate Obama really had a responsibility to the nation to spend some time explaining why what Jeremiah Wright did and said was so critically important to the work that needs to be done in this country at this point in time. And so how do you deal with this idea, this Obama moment for us, where we all want to support the president, right? But also need to push back in certain kinds of ways. Always cognizant that there are other people pushing back for really different reasons.
Well, I think that the prophetic voice of the Black faith cannot be minimized because those who serve us in the national scene are Black. They need to be held accountable
the same way
for failing to speak truth to power around historical claims of our faith. Jeremiah Wright, who is my mentor, has empowered a generation of clergy to think about the significance of being prideful of who we are as a people. That Afrocentric approach served a purpose. Now, the challenge of Black faith now is to move past it, where we can think of being particular and universal at the same time. Which is a challenge that we're facing theologically. But I do believe that Barack Obama had a responsibility to stop that madness long enough and say that there's a community who heard that message in a way that is affirming and significant for their historical claim. We have claims historically that we need to be heard on a national scene, and when you throw that to the wayside for the sake of something like a national political office, I think that the prophetic voice of the church has to say, wait a minute, let's revisit that assumption that's being made, because you're a part of this historical claim by virtue of your being a part of the church, and you know better than to say that when he says, God damn it, that means something different than what a conservative theologian or the conservative theological church may think about that.
If there's one thing that you share with this generation of Black mega preachers, is this idea that you're going to use every tool possible to do your work. And for T.D. Jakes, that maybe some bad movies. And there may be some CDs. For you, it's been novels.
Correct.
Preacher Man.
Preacher Man.
And the recently published Backslide.
Correct.
And you know, the thing that's interesting about these novels, I mean, they're fictional accounts, but not all of it is fiction.
Correct.
And you know, it honestly speaks to, I think, of the unique position of being a black man of the cloth. I mean, looking at you, you're an attractive man. You know, you look like you could have popped out of any hip hop video. You know, in the last 20 years, so you look relevant, right? You know, culturally relevant in a way. Right. You know, what has it been like trying to deal with the dynamic of being Pastor Carl Kenney, but also just being black man Carl Kenney? And how have you used these novels to kind of speak to those challenges? You know,
I think what the novels have done for me is it put me, create a lot of distance between myself and the traditional black pastor. I mean, they create incredible distance, and it forced people to really think about, is he truly a minister?
Right.
You know, and for me, that's a healthy place to be. I think the church needs to grapple with the assumptions we make about ministry. You know, the book is very upfront, dealing with issues of sexual identity. You know, what it means for this man who's single to be a pastor and engaged and figuring out what are you going to do with that. You know, and he does that. Or who you know, and who are you going to do that with? You know, he deals with that issue, and I think it's important that people realize that just because you hold the REV before your name doesn't mean that certain things stop working. Okay, so I mean, for me, you know, there's been a challenge, and I think that the church needs that, and so that being me as a writer and pastor, for me, has been rewarding, but it's also created a lot of distance and created these questions around whether or not he's a legitimate minister. Because based on that,
there's an argument to be made that the black church has not done a good job about creating the conditions for a healthy black sexuality.
No, it hasn't.
What the black church has done is demonize sex.
Well, I think we hate our black bodies, and I think that, you know, Kelly Douglas Brown does a good job of talking about how we hate our black bodies and how that's rooted in white culture. And I think it's true. And what I sought to do with both of my novels was to address it. You know, I took his clothes off. You know, I stripped him of all his clothes, and you know, and it's early in the book. I mean, my mother read the recent book, and she said, "Son, that's too much information." but it forces that conversation around.
It humanizes our ministers,
what it means for a minister to struggle with that, and how that applies to the people, and that separation between the sacrality of the pulpit and the laity who get a pass. In many cases, well, let's look at that, and then maybe we can start to address some of this mess that takes place in the church around the sexuality of our clergy. I mean, because they're hiding the truth.
In all honesty, the best moments of the black church in the United States has been the impact that the black church has had in the secular world.
Correct.
And it seems as though the black church is getting away from that responsibility. You know.
Well, I would definitely agree with that, and so to answer that question. You know, I see myself as revolutionary when it comes to many of those issues, and I love it. But it does create that distance. You know, there's a part of the black church that I miss. I miss the comfort of the black church. Yeah. You know, the stuff that comes with being the credentialed elite pastor. You miss that. You miss being comfortable. Being prophet is not a good place to be because it comes with sacrifice. But the good news is that you sleep at night knowing that you're taking on a challenge that too many are scared to take. I mean, I've had ministers who are afraid to even touch my books because of what it means, what it exposes around themselves.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're here with Pastor Carl Kenney of Compassion Ministries. We are physically here at the DU Cafe in Durham, North Carolina on West Main Street. Let me ask you this last question, and I'll just say the name.
Okay.
Eddie Long.
Eddie Long. Okay.
What do you make of the conversations, the discourse around Eddie Long these past few months?
I think that it exposes the hypocrisy of a man who's filled with homophobia and spits it to his congregation and also spits it in public space, and who is accused of being gay, but even more than that, of being a pedophile and using his power to manipulate, I think is very instructive. I think there are a number of issues we have to address. And one is, why do we give a man so much power around the money issue? We need to question the legitimacy of a pastor driving a Bentley and making $1 million plus salary.
In ATM machines and sanctuaries.
Right. I mean, we need to really question whether that's the model that the gospel really wants us to follow. There's serious questions around that. It raises, it really puts the megachurch movement under a microscope. And I think that for the majority of those who are attending those type of churches or being drawn to that, we need to ask the question, the critical question, what in the hell are you thinking? I think we really need to ask the question, what are you thinking? And being subjected to that type of manipulation around your own spirit. And what comes out on the other end of that, is that truly what you want to be?
We've been here at the BU Cafe here in Durham, North Carolina with Pastor Kenney of Compassion Ministries. You're watching Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. Thank you, Pastor Kenney, the voice of many, for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, this is Mark Anthony Neal. You're back here on Left of Black, taping a special episode of Left of Black here at the BU Cafe in Durham, North Carolina, West Main Street. And we're joined by Zelda Lockhart, who was our very first guest 14 episodes ago, who returns to us this evening. She's the author of the recently published Fifth Born 2, The 100th Turtle, which is self-published, and we had a wonderful conversation about that, back in September. But I wanted you to come back to talk specifically about some of the work you've recently been doing around the conversations around AIDS and HIV within the Black community. You partnered with WUNC Frank Stasio for World AIDS Day to talk within the Black community about this very pressing issue. And could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we continue to face? Some 30 years now, since we first realized there was this tragic disease.
Yes.
Do you find that the Black community is any more open to really discussing the implications of HIV for our communities?
Well, thanks for welcoming me back to have this conversation. And I find that in some ways, yes, that there has been movement, that there are now some churches and some community groups that are very open to having the discussion. I think that what we face is that the problem is now very individualistic in terms of the ways that the stigmas associated with the disease. I mean, disease itself is, by nature, a stigma. But then when you have people that associate that disease with something that they consider to be wrong, but actually is perfectly beautiful and natural, which is homosexuality, and when you have stigmas associated with that, it compounds folks' ability to be able to have a conversation, talk openly about HIV and AIDS, and then when you have young people who have not been properly educated and they have hormones, and there's the nature associated with youth and sex and social life around sexuality, and when those conversations are not had, it can be pretty tragic, and that the numbers, we are still seeing the numbers being profound around a disease that we could control.
We just had Pastor Kenney on, who I know was also involved in a public event with WUNC, and we talked a little bit about the fact that too often in the Black community, and the Black church is kind of an extension of that, we really demonize sex, and by extension demonize any expression of sexuality. And you mentioned in terms of the unhealthy behavior of young folks, I mean, a lot of that stems from the fact that we really don't talk honest and openly about what sex is, what the beauty of sex is. I mean, our choices are simply just to say that it's bad, that it's evil, that it can lead to teenage pregnancy, that it can lead to AIDS. I mean, a range of things, right? Without ever talking about making healthy, mature choices around sexual practices.
Right, and it's difficult for young people to integrate those choices into their reality when they have that, when sex itself is stigmatized. And then there's that, then there, you know, it's confusing in terms of, well, there's this reality of sex in my life and the nature of my sexual life and my sexual reality, and then there being so many things that they are told socially, don't do that. But and then there's what they see around them. There's movies. They're the other adults that they see in their lives, not following the very things that they've been told. So it you know, it can be very complicated. But at the same time, there are things like with the character Lamont in the novel. There are other factors that impact people's ability to keep themselves safe and keep their bodies safe. There's previous abuse that a person may have suffered, and then the ways that their then the ways that their self-esteem is damaged by that, and the ways that they seek love, seek connection, seek physical connection. So we know that with men and women, that previous abuse and current abuse in their lives and power and control struggles has also a lot to do with them being vulnerable to contracting HIV.
We know that when terms like AIDS and HIV come up in Black communities, the narrative always reflects a certain logic, right? Immediately, it's a discussion about the increase in HIV rates amongst Black women, and that always travels us down the road of Black men on the DL. And the conversation literally stops there. We don't ask any more questions. We assume that we have every answer to the question, and our response to it is, well, then we need to do something about these Black men on the DL, right? Whether it's, you know, punishment, whether or not it's you know, forcing them out of the community. I mean, those are the narratives that we hear. How do we deal with those challenges, you know, to get folks to understand that it's a much broader, right?
It's
I mean,
so much broader.
For all the Black men who are having unsafe sex with male partners, there are Black men having unsafe sex
with female
partners, right? And admittedly, probably more.
And
there's no conversation about that.
Right. I think that's the issue. The issue is around safe sex practices, and to be able to have those conversations and remove from the conversation who's having sex with whom, because that is not.
It's irrelevant.
That is completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
You know, because of we know how the disease is contracted, and you know, you can be men having sex with men, men having sex with women, women having sex with women. It's about safe sex practice. You know, it isn't about if this man is married and he's having sex with somebody on the side and that somebody happens to be a man. It's not about that. It's about safe sex, regardless to what type of relationship that you're in. And I think that when we begin talking about our respect, our lack of respect for our own bodies and for our own existence, you know, that's what it's connected to. When there is something as simple as, you know, if you say to someone, do you know to keep from catching the flu, that one of the things that you could do is use hand sanitizer, and then you don't have a problem with people using hand sanitizer. They just, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna go to the drugstore and pick some up. You know, but when you say to someone, do you know one of the things that you can do in order to really curtail the spread of HIV is to wear a condom? Then you know, then you don't get people running out to the drugstore. You
can pick them up in the same place. Pick up the sanitizer in one aisle.
That's right. You still go to Food Line. You still go to Kurt Drug. You still go in, you know, same thing. You can go pick that up. It will really. We're talking about virus. We're talking about spread of virus. We're talking about education of how that virus is spread. But then when you enter in other social stigmas associated with it, then it's what changes the game. Yes.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're here at the BU Cafe of West Main Street in Durham, North Carolina. Our guest this evening is novelist Zelda Zelda Lockhart, author of Fifth Born 2, The 100th Turtle. Let me ask you this question. I was in the car with my 12-year-old, and there was a discussion that don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah.
And my daughter listened to the conversation, and she just instinctively goes, well, if they're willing to fight a war for this country, what does it matter?
Right.
And as I'm having this conversation with my 12-year-old, I'm thinking that I could have never had a conversation about homosexuality with my parents. In any way, shape, and we just could have never had that conversation. But
That's
yet,
right.
with my 12-year-old, right, not only can I have this conversation, but there's almost a level of sophistication about it. Do you see hopeful signs
Yes.
amongst young folks? I mean, and we could talk about unsafe sexual practices, but in terms of understanding the fluidity of sexuality, do you see, signs, amongst the younger generation of folks?
I do. I see a shift that has happened because you have people who are willing to talk about it. You have folks that are our generation who say, my parents did not give me all of the information, and I want to make sure that my children understand everything and that they technically understand it correctly.
Right.
Not where there's myth associated with it, or where they have to go and spread myth because they haven't figured out something correctly themselves and then go tell other people. But I want them to know, and I want them to understand. But what does concern me, Mark, is the number of people who still say, no, I don't really want to talk to my boy about that. He needs to find out, he needs to go out there in the streets and figure it out for himself. He needs to go get some life experience. He needs to, and so on and so forth. But there is the opportunity. So where I see the shift is with folks like our generation who have decided, no, I want my children to have the information.
Right.
And I see then the potential and the opportunity for that education to go much further if we then tell our children to be in touch with and not separate themselves from other young folks. My son, he's 25 years old now, and he's teaching middle school, and he's inner city in Charlotte. He has a huge opportunity in front of him.
Right, every day.
Every day.
Every day.
Because he was taught in that way. There's my mom at the high school, and she's got condoms in the trunk. What's the matter with her? But he has that experience of having a mother who is doing community AIDS theater with his teenage peers. And so he knows that it's all about education. It's all about making sure that the people have the right information. So we have an opportunity in educating our children to make sure that spreads and then spreads and then spreads, because that's countering the virus.
Yeah.
It's doing verbal virus.
Right.
Right. So we're countering that by saying, okay, let's take this information.
Much like social media.
Exactly,
right?
which is
Concepts
what we're doing
go
here.
Viral. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. We're battling virus with virus.
Yeah.
And if you put it out there, if you put the information everywhere, it also begins to take the taboo out of it. Because when something is walking around in the midst of your everyday life, all of a sudden it's not this big scary thing anymore.
It's part of your reality.
Yeah, everybody's talking about it, and it's just part of the conversation now. So we have to continue to say, no, we're going to make this part of the conversation. We're going to have this conversation, Yeah.
We're here with Zelda Lockhart on Left of Black. We're here at the BU Cafe, West Main Street in Durham, North Carolina. You did this incredible event on World AIDS Day at the Hayti, which is a very historically important cultural resource here for the Black community in Durham. What was the event like?
It had many different aspects to it. We worked to put it together, co-producing it with the folks at WUNC, which was wonderful and amazing. We had a small audience, not as large as we had hoped for. But then again, the goal with this type of thing is to whoever's present,
right.
You work with who's present, because that's how we get the information to spread.
And then, of course, it was broadcast.
And it was
WUNC,
broadcast, exactly, and that's
right.
another way for the information to spread,
right.
for the people who are comfortable consuming the information in the privacy of their own homes, who might not want to be in an audience.
Yeah.
So I think it was very powerful. We had a very powerful panel of people, and we had a very impromptu discussion that we engaged in on that panel. And it's going to be different every time. So there's been the Harlem Book Fair production of it, WUNC radio, hopefully more in between, but I'm also in September of 2011 co-producing it at DePaul University with the Center for Black Culture.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we hope to, oh, wonderful, that we hope to do is by having more time, by having that kind of time, is to really generate the interest and bring in groups of people who are interested in having that conversation and really make it a serious, large community event. Yeah.
What's next for you, Zelda?
Oh, so many things, Mark. I'm working on, still working on my project with elders, collecting stories from elders, which has completely changed my life.
Right. And these are elders who are writing their own stories. Some of them for the first time. Right?
Some of them, yeah, for the first time. Some of them are verbally speaking the stories to me, and I'm transcribing and working really hard in lots of ways that I have never worked before to listen and communicate and make sure that I'm getting the story down as verbatim. And if they loop in the story, which happens a lot, these are all elders over the age of 80. So if they are looping often in their storytelling, to make sure that each time that I'm picking up something that wasn't in the story before. And then stimulating them also out of the loops and into other areas of storytelling. I have learned things about life and existence and truth-telling and being here for real and what you intend to do with your time here that I could not have ever imagined by this project. So I don't know what it will look like in its end format, but I do know that the process has been powerful. Yeah.
You've been watching Left to Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We've been here with our special guest, Zelda Lockhart, author of Fifth Born 2, The 100th Hurdle. We've done a special evening of broadcast here at the BU Cafe in Durham, North Carolina on West Main Street. Met in West Main Street. If you're here in Durham, please take an opportunity to come visit the BU Cafe and its owner, Dorian. Thank you for watching Left to Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We'll see you next week.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.